Alrighty, what's up, basketball fans all around? It's been a few weeks since our last discussion that happened right before the All Star weekend took off, I think. But now that the games are back, so are we. And with the regular season nearing its end and teams beginning to make their final adjustments heading into the postseason, we here at Players Shutter Podcast decided we could use some of this time during the calm before the storm, quote unquote, to take a step back from the noise on court and just talk basketball. And by that, I mean to imply basketball outside of the immediate hype. Of course, I want to speak on Russ with the Clippers or KD's play with the Suns, especially that debut he played in versus the Charlotte Hornets, or even Kevin Love signing with Miami following the buyout with the Cleveland Cavaliers. By the way, shout out to Kalo for getting his jersey retirement with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And actually, shout out to everyone who made the 2023 Hall of Fame nominee list as well. I think some people I saw in there highlights were like Tony Parker, Coach Pop. I even saw D Wade on there. Shout out to big homie D Wade, repping the Miami Heat franchise. You know that's the home team. Yes, sir. But without further delay, here are some of the topics that I hope to cover in these more laid back, personalized type of segments. And before anything else, I want to mention that this will probably be a short one, considering this is just introducing the whole topic of this, of stepping outside of the direct encore action. So while keeping up with current events and the latest buzz is fun and whatnot, that isn't the entirety of what basketball it is. It is more than just simply throwing a ball into a hoop or a bunch of people squeaking their shoes on the floor for extended periods of time. And to start the series off right, I think it would be best to lay some groundwork. So that would mean taking on questions like, what does basketball mean to me personally? Or what style do I prefer? And so forth and so forth, stuff around that. So check this out. Since the first release of this podcast, and I mean since the very first episode came out, I've been asked frequently by people I come across during my day to day, and that includes like at work or people I play Xbox with, people I've had recent engagements with while I was streaming that I interact with on Twitter and stuff still. Always get asked, why basketball? Like, why a basketball podcast? And don't get me wrong, it isn't typically asked with a negative tone or connotation, but why basketball? What led you to this? And so on. Well, first, let me say that if I hadn't mentioned it already, I love talking about hoops. This entire podcast came to be because of a few years back in my late teen years, I would catch myself in an Xbox party chat at 7 a.m. I kid you not, 7 a.m. talking about basketball. Wouldn't even be playing anything, just sitting there chatting it up with some of my homies for 5 to 6 hours at a time. Sometimes less, depending on what time we started. It could even be longer. And if I did have the sticks in my hands, I was on 2K doing the exact same thing. We just be in there talking about anything, from players to teams to predictions to something funnier that we heard earlier that afternoon or morning. It didn't matter. But back to the question. So why basketball? Well, why not? It has everything. I mean, like, it has the team aspect. It's fast paced. It's rather flashy at times. It has comfortable apparel, and it's a full body workout. And actually, just to add on there, my personal favorite is has a positive impact on the community that it reaches. You couldn't count how many current and former basketball players, not just NBA players, basketball players, can say that the sport changed their lives for the better or impacted it in a positive way of some sort. In my community specifically, I know there are tons of young boys and girls and teens who share a viewpoint that one day they may hope to use their skill and talent to change their situation for the better. And I know we've all had, that same dream of going pro, hoop dreams for better words, but even for those of us who don't make it to the A, and which is most of us, just getting out to throw up a couple of shots can be relaxing or therapeutic, if I may. And I know for sure that the hoopers out there who hear me say that this is more than just a game know exactly what I'm talking about. It's more than a sport. It's a livelihood, and it means to connect, if you will. But with that being said, having that kind of connection with basketball is ultimately what led to the birth of the Player Chatter podcast. For me, it was my urge to be involved somehow, whether it was watching the game, playing, discussing, or debating, whatever. It didn't matter. I just felt like I have a passion for this sport, and I needed to act on it, so I did. And honestly, you guys, I can't wait to have some more of the peeps on some of these episodes so we can really get into it as far as what is basketball and stuff like that goes. But for now, you guys will just have to put up with me. I apologize for that, but it'll pay out in the end. Trust me, you'll see. But again, it's crazy how large of a presence that this sport has, even globally. Thinking back on how I developed my own game, which started with me trying to idolize and mimic CP3, and I know for sure that everyone has that one player that they start off with. Like some people would be like, "Oh, I want to be like Chris Paul. I want to be like Kyrie, or I want to be like KD." It doesn't matter. Mine was Chris Paul, and he's still my favorite player even till this day. But within that, I can admit that I wasn't the best shooter or scorer for that matter. I was kind of a late bloomer in that department. Instead, I focused on other things that Chris Paul is known for, like his perimeter defense and his passing ability. I think I focused more on defense, even more so than passing. Passing was more like fundamentals back in 7, 8, 9 year old rec leagues. But my defense, I was really great at forcing turnovers and getting steals and stuff. At least I believe I was. But ultimately, I was just trying to create windows of opportunity for whatever team I was on in any way I could that didn't involve me having to have the ball in my hands too much. Because I wasn't the best ball handler. And even though I eventually came to the point where I could effectively create my own shot, that doesn't matter now because we're talking about when I was 7, 8 years old. I can even tell you guys about the time where I finally did get my first CP2 comparison. It's actually a pretty cool story. Check this out. It was back in like sophomore year, junior year of high school, and it was at LA Fitness. I would always go to the court with my cousin. He would take me after school every day. We went to the same school, and I was hot for about 3 or 4 games straight. Like I was always decent with passing, but I was hitting tight windows. I was locking up people who were go mouse in the house, mouse in the house. It didn't matter. And for me not being a great shooter, like I barely took any threes back then. I was hitting, and I was hard. And I got that comparison. And while it was cool for someone to acknowledge the similarities in my game to Chris Paul's, I'm even more bewildered by the realization of the correlation between my play style and leadership and social habits. And after saying that, I see that that could be kind of confusing. So I'm going to repeat it in a more easier way without trying to get like too philosophical with this at this very moment. I'll just say that I mean to acknowledge the correlation between my growth as a player as well as my growth as an individual, both together hand in hand. Now, I say that because I personally feel as if I focus on the team aspect of the game, like trying to advance my skills that revolved around passing and forcing turnovers, creating those opportunities for other people to take advantage of. I think it's sort of translated in a sense. Like, for example, I'm big on group projects, whether it's starting a podcast or doing music, story writing, script writing, whatever it may be. I tend to try to make it into some type of team project where others can enjoy it with me as well as reap the benefits. If it turns out to be a good idea, of course. But more often than not, you'll find me cooking up plans and ideas for the entire squad that you from. And it's the same way on the court, to a fault sometimes, and that's just who I am. I mean, note that like many other sports, basketball is inherently team oriented. To play the game right is to imply that you're playing team basketball, in my opinion at least. I mean, heck, I'll even go as far as to say that I feel like that should be universal, respectively. Yet saying that sort of prompts the question of what is good teamwork and what does that even look like? So tons of people will give tons of different answers, but for me it's rather simple. And I feel actually I take that back. I don't think tons of people will give you different answers. Most people will say that it's good ball facilitation, knowing where to be, not looking lost on the court, things like that. But I have a few principles that I try to build my game off of, and I built these principles throughout the years. So here they are. One is ball facilitation. I just mentioned that, and that involves making plays for both yourself and your teammates. It involves passing, etc. Secondly is motion, moving without the ball efficiently, knowing where to be and doing so unselfishly. You know, maybe you screen for someone else for a change. You might be able to get some space off of that, whether you pop, roll, stand still, whatever you do after that. It might benefit you as well as a bonus. Oh, and furthermore, call it out, communicate. It's not hard. Some people make it harder than it has to be. I really don't get that. But Lastly, number three, effort, which kind of ties everything together. And that means the effort to make the extra play, to go the extra mile, to hustle, and generally to improve on your weaknesses, which I feel like could be a life lesson as well. But these are my fundamentals to good team ball, and I've seen that the teams that excel in these are typically top of the league standings. You could check that for yourself, but I've consistently seen that be the case. And of course, there's more to it, like actual skill, ability, personnel, etc. But I feel like a successful game plan for players to follow, not just teams, would be that. But I do have to admit, it's kind of tough to dive into this just talking to myself, without anyone here with me. But I kind of wanted to throw this all together as some sort of like food for thought. Feel free to pitch in on your own thoughts and ideas. Maybe we'll be able to come back to this subject rather soon. But unfortunately, that is all we have today, you guys. Again, this is going to be a short one. It's probably the shortest one we have so far, but it is the first of its kind, and I hope to improve on this as we continue forward. There will be more to come, lots more to come. But thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget that you can check out other episodes of the Player Chatter podcast here on Spotify and on Anchor FM for free as well. If you like what we discuss here in the pod and are wondering how you can engage, whether it's material you'd like to see covered or additional questions and inquiries about the Player Chatter podcast itself, please feel free to reach out to us via email at playerchatterpodcast@gmail.com or check us out on Twitter at playerchatter. Thank you, and I hope to see you all again next time.